Kyle, so we have a little bit of a disagreement, and it was over something I posted on social media. Mike Trout might finish his career statistically better than Bryce Harper in every single category. But if Bryce leads this Phillies team to a championship as the World Series MVP, he, not Trout, will be the player of their generation. Kyle, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the first part kind of sums it up. If he's better than Bryce Harper in every statistical category, and he won't be better than Bryce Harper in every statistical category, but if he's better than Bryce Harper in every statistical category, Mike Trout was the better player. That seems to be a pretty transparent point there, which I originally, when I sent that to you, I thought that you were going to take a shot at the Angels as a result of that, but then it turned to Bryce Harper would be the generation's greatest player. I'm like, wow, we are living in the moment right now. This is a very we are on a train where the only thing we can see is a
built on moments, and Mike Trout has 0.0 moments. What is the signature Mike Trout moment?
That catch he made in Baltimore, probably, where he bounces his hip against the wall. I think that's probably the best moment.
A game in Baltimore when I just saw Bryce Harper put one in the seats to end your Padres season.
Yeah, that does count. I just don't evaluate greatest players of their generations based on moments, I suppose.
See, when we're talking about great players, and normally I'm not a ring counter, but when we're talking about great players and comparing them amongst each other, championships and postseason moments start to add. And if Mike Trout legitimately goes 20 years and only makes the postseason once, now I know it's not all his fault because baseball is not driven by one single player, but you share some of the blame. You are part of those teams. There's something, some way in the math that's not working out to you being able to capitalize on the moments, because it's not like Bryce Harper exactly had a loaded team we thought going into the year. The Phillies were very underrated. They were the third team in their division amongst the Braves and Mets, and yet the Phillies are here. And you would look at what brought them to this point. Well, excellent bats, of course, up and down the order, that helps. But Bryce Harper, his postseason that he's having right now, he's literally putting this team on the back. You mentioned the numbers in our World Series breakdown. His plus 1 point something OPS that he has to this point, the multiple home runs, the multiple RBI doubles. If he's able to lead his team to a World Series, and we're still going into this, we don't know what the result is going to be against the Astros, but if he's able to pull that one off while being the driving force, it's going to be hard to ignore him whenever we're comparing careers at the end of the day.
You are absolutely correct. And that moment is going to be the thing that resonates, because ultimately, sports are fun because of moments and emotional connections. I believe as a sports fan, you should always shoot for emotions and moments. That's the only thing. If you play for a team, your objective should be the most important thing is winning, and the end goal should be to win a championship or personal success or whatever it is. If you're a fan and you don't have an actual investment personally in the success or failure of the team, you should just be shooting for moments. So what Bryce Harper's delivered this postseason is moments that even I, when he's doing it to my team, I'm like, oh my God, this is absolutely amazing. It's the greatest postseason run since Randy Arozarena's random postseason in 2020, where he was making $80,000 for the Tampa Bay Rays and hitting 11 homers in the playoffs. But Bryce Harper having that moment is something that resonates with the sports fan. And at the same time, I'll go back to the same point at the beginning. If Mike Trout is better than him in every statistical category, or most of the statistical categories, Mike Trout is the better player than Bryce Harper, because I don't think that 2 at-bats will define a career more than the thousands of repetitions that get put in consistently throughout the seasons.
I think that it can overweigh that, because the weight of those at-bats, if you never have a meaningful at-bat, and Mike Trout, at this point, has he had a meaningful at-bat? When sports fans look at who came up in the biggest spots, they're going to look at a guy like Harper, who literally, again, that one swing in particular against the Padres is going to stick in people's minds. But there's been a lot of moments throughout this postseason. And not only that, but Bryce Harper, that's not just any home run. That's also his 9th home run in the postseason. So he's been able to do this throughout multiple years, multiple jerseys. He's shown that he's able to perform in the postseason. So it's not just a fluke. I think part of any great player is being able to have some level of postseason success. And it's not, again, just rings, because Barry Bonds, why do we regard Barry Bonds as the best player of his generation? And he never came down with the championship. In the 2002 postseason, you could say, who was a driving force on that team? Clearly Bonds. Everyone's going to remember the tight end home runs that he was hitting against the Angels. It just happened that bullpen decisions cost him a ring, unfortunately. And that happens, but you can look at Bonds and you can look at his postseason numbers and say that it's not Bonds' fault. When it comes to Trout, it's just like, if you go 20 years, look at a guy like Derek Carr, right? Like Derek Carr may very well have a very good career in the National
That's
Football League.
disrespectful.
But the fact that he
so
will never make the playoffs, it's a little disrespectful. I'm not going to lie, but it's disrespectful to Derek Carr. It's also disrespectful to his organization. Similar boats, we talk about the Angels and compare them to like the Raiders. The Angels might be the Raiders of Major League Baseball in terms of team success over the last 20 years. They're probably very close if we were actually to run those numbers on who's been more pitiful as an organization. But Derek Carr will never be regarded as one of the greats, no matter how good of a quarterback he is statistically, unless he's able to get in the postseason and make some noise. Now, he may have more impact on the game as a quarterback than Mike Trout can have as a center fielder and outfielder and a general hitter. And now he's starting to hit that tail end of his career that we don't know what his numbers will turn out in the long run. Harper at least seems to be, when he's healthy on the field, trending in a positive direction in terms of his numbers and production. So let's talk about the numbers. Bryce Harper currently sits at 285 career home runs versus Mike Trout. Mike Trout is currently sitting at this point today at 350. So he's got him beat by about 50. You can take out some of the injury seasons there for Harper. That's probably one of the big things why he hasn't really caught up to him. He is obviously younger than Mike Trout, so he has a little bit more opportunity to keep going. MVPs, we talk about counting hardware a little bit. So 3-time MVP is Mike Trout. You have a 2-time MVP in Bryce Harper. Mike Trout, again, I just feel like he's going to get hurt on the superlatives. People just haven't seen him in those big spots.
Well, at the same time, let's talk about some of the other statistics beyond those two, which is Mike Trout's career WAR is double that of Bryce Harper. Wins above replacement for Mike Trout is sitting at 82. Bryce Harper's sitting at 42 currently. And I know Mike Trout's had a couple extra seasons than Bryce Harper to get those numbers. Mike Trout has nearly 40 more wins above replacement. And for reference, for people who don't know, if you're between like 50 and 70, that's a Hall of Fame baseball player, is like the ballpark reference. There are people in the 40s who have gotten in. There are people, there are a handful of 30s who have gotten in, but for the most part, 50 to 70 wins above replacement is a Hall of Famer. Mike Trout's already at 82 wins above replacement. Mike Trout's OPS plus, which the league average is about 100, he's 178 for his career. Bryce Harper is 148 for his career. So that's a 30-point improvement there. And Mike Trout is one of the greatest defensive players of his generation. And this is not to diminish Bryce Harper as a player by any stretch of the imagination. They are the two best players at this time for like the era of people who like hit their primes between 28 and 33. Mike Trout's just this great test because there have been players who are all-time great who don't make the playoffs consistently. Ken Griffey Jr. made the playoffs like twice in his entire career, but it's rare that this is the undisputed best player in baseball for 5 to 6 years and his team has been so poor. And baseball's the one sport where this can happen because the value of a great superstar in baseball is not equal to that of a quarterback in football, where like Patrick Mahomes, the Chiefs can get rid of Tyrann Mathieu, they can get rid of Tyreek Hill, they can get rid of Daniel Sorensen, they can get rid of all of those players that they've gotten rid of over the last 2 years and still have the number 2 offense in football. That concept just doesn't exist in baseball because one single player can't have the same impact on the sport. One, because they only bat every 9 times in the rotation, and also a singular player in baseball. The difference between Mike Trout and Trent Grisham is like 1 hit every 10 at bats. Like it's such a thin margin within baseball. Not only that, like players just can't have that singular impact. So Mike Trout really tests the case of like, can the greatest player ever come from a team that never makes it? Because eventually the player switches teams. Eventually the player has a situation where the team just messes around and makes the playoffs. And that just hasn't happened for Mike Trout because of 1, the Angels' ineptitude, and 2, Mike Trout's just signed with the Angels. He likes living in Los Angeles. He's a very low-key guy, and that was just the thing that he wanted to do. And the Angels have failed him at every turn, as you and I have talked about over and over. You describe it as baseball hell, which I would classify as Pittsburgh, but it's kind of the same idea, like that the organization has just failed him at every single turn.
Again, why the Angels are baseball hell, for those that don't know my theory, is because hell is based on ironic punishments. What's more ironic than getting 2 all-time greats in your franchise, in your building, signing all these high-priced veterans who in theory should work, former MVPs, a guy who literally hit 700 home runs this year, but yet you still can't make the postseason. How ridiculous is that? What kind of cosmic treadmill is it like to be an Angels fan and have to continuously go through this? This is Homer eating in hell, like keeps getting the donuts, keeps getting the donuts. Oh, you like donuts? Let me just feed them on a conveyor belt. This is the ironic punishment that is being an Angels fan. You get to see all-time greatness like Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani, but you never get to see the greatness of team success that we're seeing with Bryce Harper. And I think that if you're baseball, you almost wish that Mike Trout could have the career right now that Bryce Harper's having, in the sense of who's been the more exciting player too? Who's been the poster boy for
okay, so
for
this
baseball?
is the difficult part, because this is another part of the change in baseball, even going back to talking about Barry Bonds and Alex Rodriguez and people from when I was a very, very young child and you were at least old enough to remember the 2002 World Series run, is that baseball has become such a regional sport that if you don't live in the market where the team is playing, you're probably not watching a whole lot of Mike Trout unless you are one of these super baseball fans who really, really loves following the sport. That the casual baseball fan, shall we say, is not watching Mike Trout, is not watching Bryce Harper unless they make it to the playoffs. And that's part of the regionalization of the sport, is that we see all these numbers for Mike Trout, we see all the highlights of Mike Trout, but we're not actually watching him play baseball.
I think I may have misspoke. I meant to say that I think baseball wishes that Mike Trout what Bryce Harper is. You know, we go back to his rookie year. That's a clown question, bro. Everyone's putting that on t-shirts. Iconic moments in the home run derby when he was able to take down the home run derby champion, which is something that's really big in baseball and one of the big things that fans enjoy. And now we're seeing him have this postseason. When we talk about comparing these guys when their career's all said and done, if I have hardware for Harper and I have multiple MVPs and their numbers kind of look the same at the end of the day, like maybe Bryce is just a tick below, it's going to be hard for me to have Mike Trout above Bryce Harper in the all-time rankings, because we always talk about it with Hall of Fame discussions, right? Can you tell the story of the respective sport without such player? One of the big reasons a guy like Philip Rivers is probably not a Hall of Famer for me is because I feel as though there's a lot of Philip Rivers that have come and gone. He's going to go down as more of a stat compiler. Matt Ryan, I think he's more of a Hall of Famer because he'll have the hardware. He'll have the big game moments, the NFC title games.
You're hurting my heart. Don't do that to Philip. Don't do that to Philip. I got to do it to Philip. He played an AFC championship game with a torn ACL.
The fact that he's had all these loaded teams and was never able to ascend to anything greater is going to hurt his legacy to me. Again, Trout has had loaded teams. He's had other talent in the building, but I just think that if we're going to get to the point where we're a 15, 20-year career, you got to give me something. You got to give me something more. We're building Mount Rushmores. Talked about Derek Jeter's career versus Ichiro's. They're probably similar, but at the same time, since Jeter was able to pull down those championships, those meaningful at-bats, his career is just always going to be looked on more favorably, even if someone is like the better player. I mean, we talk about like the Gold Glove argument with Jeter all the time, right? There's probably other better shortstops, but the fact that Jeter had the iconic 360 throw kept him in the Gold Glove discussion. Or it's baseball's a little bit of storytelling, a little bit of play, and the fact that Mike Trout hasn't really been able to tell a good story throughout his career. It's like being in a good movie that doesn't really like have a satisfying conclusion. I feel like that's what Mike Trout's career may turn out being.
So that part's interesting. And you also said, like, if their numbers are comparable, if we refer back to the original tweet, you're talking about if Bryce Harper is worse than him in every statistical category was the
worse
original
could be like
point.
one home run. You know, you're still technically worse in a certain category.
Yeah, Bryce Harper will never catch Mike Trout in WAR. There's going to be a huge gap there. There's going to be a huge gap in OPS plus. There's going to be a huge gap in defense. I mean, even there's going to be a huge gap in home runs probably at the end of their career and runs batted in. And Mike Trout's going to get 3,000 hits. I mean,
Kershaw might have better numbers than Verlander, but because Verlander was able to come up bigger in the postseason, at least one postseason run in 2017 where he was 4-1, I'm going to look more favorably on Verlander's career than I will look at Kershaw's career.
That's kind of a personal evaluation thing, because you can plug numbers into a computer and get an answer, and that will tell you who the best player of all time is. I think that's what a lot of people are doing with Mike Trout. Now, they have memories that they enjoy watching with Mike Trout. It's not exactly the same. And I guess for me, when it comes to the whole, like, he doesn't have moments situation, it's like, it's not his fault. It's not his fault. It's not his fault. Just because seasons keep going on, it doesn't make it any more his fault.
I feel like it could
nothing's
not
changing
be your fault for only so long. long. Like at a certain point, that just feels like an excuse. Fair or not, it just feels like an excuse.
My question would be, what's changing? Is it just that time is going on? Because the circumstances haven't changed. The Angels have brought in different players. They've spent different resources. They have Shohei Ohtani
Listen,
now.
we
Is
saw
it
the
just
Guardians in the postseason this year. The Guardians team we thought was tanking. You're telling me you can't even, we saw the playoffs expand. And again, is this just purely an organization? What if we really analyze these home runs? Is it easier to hit home runs when you're 20 games back in the standings and no one gives a shit? Or is it harder to hit those home runs whenever it matters? Bryce, here in this 8th inning, you're down a run and you need to put one in the bleachers. Sometimes not having a pressure environment, it's easier to coast your career. It feels like he's coasting. It feels like that signing, that extension he signed with the Angels is him saying, I'm satisfied with a mediocre ending to my career. Because the Angels have just been
that's
this
a
team.
damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Because if he goes to another team, it's going to be like, oh, look at you coasting along with this team. But if you play with the Angels, like that's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation.
I feel
think
like though Bryce kind of rebuked that when he signed with the Phillies, because now he's over there leading the charge for this Phillies team.
Yes, but it took 4 years of missing Bryce Harper hasn't been to the playoffs in 5 seasons. And in a non-Mike Trout world, that's a really long playoff drought. Like Bryce Harper would be classified with the group of like, hey, this guy doesn't make the play. But it doesn't matter in baseball. Baseball's the one sport where no matter how much money you spend on a player, one player can't turn the tides for you. And this has always been the case. It's just the best players of this generation happen to not be, because also the gap is widening between the haves and have-nots in baseball. Like the difference between teams at the bottom and teams at the top has never been wider than it has been, I think, since like the 1970s. It's interesting, that conversation, because Bryce Harper hasn't been to the playoffs in a long ass time. And the first time he gets there, he delivers the 1 year moment that for you puts it over the top. Is just the one, give me one postseason run and that will get it.
Give me one postseason run for Mike Trout. I just need to see that he can do it. Not turning in the assignment, it just won't be good enough when I'm evaluating his entire totality of his career. I need to at least see that he could do it, and it was purely the Angels that let him down. I need to see him in the postseason.
We know it's the Angels that let him down. You and I both know that's the case. There's the evidence doesn't tell us that there's anything other than this is the Angels' fault. And just because it keeps going on year after year doesn't change the fact. It would be nice to change the conversation to like, well, the one consistent is Mike Trout, but no, we know the evidence is that it's the Angels' fault. It's the Angels' ineptitude and have failed him at every turn. That's the reason that this has happened. And just because it's gone on long enough doesn't mean it's Trout's fault.
If he goes down today, retires, it's over for Mike Trout. His postseason batting line will be 083, 267 OPS, and a .33 slug.
But that's 1 for 12. That's one for 12.
But that would be the only reference point of Mike Trout as a postseason player, Mike Trout in clutch moments, Mike Trout when the games matter, and that would be an indictment on him. If again, Bryce Harper, the numbers are somewhat comparable, and Bryce has this run. This run is world changing for Bryce Harper.
I don't think a singular postseason run can do that. I don't think it's physically possible.
Listen, Madison Bumgarner, if it wasn't for the postseason, he would be just a bum. Madison Bumgarner would be a bum if it wasn't for his postseason success. Like,
it's going to help. It's going to help his Hall of Fame case for sure.
The fact we can even talk about Madison Bumgarner as a Hall of Fame level player, despite that he didn't really even have the longevity, or the counting stats are not going to look great. But I can look at those 3 postseasons. In fact, that one postseason where legitimately he put the Giants on his back. The rotation for the Giants was awful. This Phillies batting order is being sensational this postseason, but Bryce, his impact is felt. His impact is felt in every single one of these games. Putting that in a historical context like he did the other day, of he's outperforming a postseason Ryan Howard. It really encapsulates that this is more than just a flash in the pan. And if the Phillies come down with hardware, and again, he's the World Series MVP, if I'm building a Mount Rushmore, I would have Bryce ahead of Mike Trout.
So I think that's true. I think we can put postseason performances within the context to elevate the career of a player. It just doesn't have to come at the expense of a player who, again, is clearly better than him in most statistical categories. I think
If
both
we're
of those
talking
things
about
can be
rankings,
true.
man, rankings are very simple. You have to put one ahead of the other. It may not be your preferred system, but we all do it.
Yeah.
That we always have internally a 1, 2, 3. Some people have a 1B. Some people do the tiers.
But it doesn't, yeah, you're right, but it doesn't make it true. It doesn't, it just makes it so that it's true for someone else. It doesn't necessarily
if
go
I'm
along with the
telling my
evidence.
grandkids 50 years from now, who would I rather have bases loaded, game 7, World Series? It would probably Bryce Harper because I know he could do it. You know?
I mean, I would say no, but just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean that it can't happen. But also that's just
This is
the
like buying
evidence
into the
tells us
religion
that
of Mike Trout.
it's not necessarily that it's a religion. It's like, I suspect that if he got the opportunity, it would look something like that. If you gave him, say, Jose Altuve levels of postseason at bats, Mike Trout would probably have a pretty incredible resume when it comes to playoff baseball. I just don't have the evidence that confirms nor denies it, but that doesn't subtract from Mike Trout's career because, again, it's not Mike Trout's fault. None of it is Mike Trout's
You're
fault.
chasing Sasquatch here, man. You're chasing a
But I
Bigfoot. You're
have
chasing
no,
a Yeti.
No, you're correct. And I don't need it in order to look at Mike Trout and say Mike Trout has been the best player in baseball for 5 to 6 years on an unprecedented level. All of his statistics are beyond even the greatest of greats that you can point to. He beat Jeff Bagwell, who's a Hall of Famer. He beat his career WAR in 6 seasons. Like, Mike Trout is so far and away the best player, or he was. He's not anymore, but he was for so many years far and away the best player in baseball. And it's something that he's the first player of my generation, of course, and Bryce Harper's right there with him, where they both came in the league right around the time when I was really starting to get into sports as like a 9, 10, 11-year-old. So this is like the first generation of baseball players where I've seen their entire careers play out. And we have data that tells us, even though I can't speak for players who were born before me, we have evidence that suggests that within the context of the last 10 years, Mike Trout is far and away the best player in baseball. And again, to your original tweet, if he finishes with better statistics than Bryce Harper in every measurable category, end of conversation. He is a better player. There is nothing that Bryce Harper could do
the player of
postseason
the
aside
generation's
that
a
jumps
whole
him.
picture, though. I need the whole story.
Yes, I think you're correct. And I think that when we're talking about the statistics being what they are, Bryce Harper can have an incredible postseason run like he's having, totally unprecedented, except for when Randy Arozarena did it for some weird reason a couple years ago. Yes, Bryce Harper can elevate his own career, and also it won't be enough to overcome the statistical gap that he and Mike Trout possess. Because again, Bryce Harper is probably a first ballot Hall of Famer. I would assume if not first ballot, he'll get in on the second ballot, like kind of like what Trevor Hoffman had a couple years ago. Like, Bryce Harper's incredible.
I feel as though we're having the same disagreement that baseball fans are having all over the world of stat sheets versus what you can see with your eyes. And I feel as though the fact that I can point to tangible evidence with Bryce Harper is enough for me to say that if he gets it done, if I have that image of Bryce Harper leading the charge to a World Series team, then that's enough for me to leapfrog him over, because analytics, it's tangible evidence at a certain point.
Well, it's tangible evidence that you can see in the postseason when you're watching. Like, Mike Trout has thousands of baseball games of evidence that you can watch. You can see what happened.
He also has thousands of meaningless games in the grand scheme of things.
But if those games are meaningless and baseball playoff games are incredibly meaningful, which, by the way, they are, like, the stakes on regular season baseball is nothing, and the stakes on postseason baseball is everything. It's why the sport has an awesome playoffs and an irrelevant regular season. That doesn't mean that the regular season games are totally irrelevant in terms of magnifying like the players themselves. It just means they have no stakes to them. But it doesn't mean that that's also not where you make your money and where the baseball players are playing. Again, 162 of these baseball games compared to Bryce Harper, who's had an 11-game really, really good stretch. Like, we have not just 1,000, we have thousands of games of sample size for what these two players are. And I would point to that as being a more tried and true evaluation of who the best is compared to Trout and Harper's postseason statistics. And like you said in the original tweet, if Mike Trout finishes better than Bryce Harper in every statistical category, I think that those thousands of games, literally thousands, represent a better sample size compared to the incredible postseason run by Bryce Harper, which will elevate his career, just not to the level of we will throw out thousands of games of statistics in order to make you the best player of your generation.
All right, guys. Well, weigh in the comment section. Do you think that one postseason run for an already great player can leapfrog him ahead of another great player? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on social media. From Kyle and Juju, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We'll see you on the next one.